If you've been watching photography YouTube, then you've probably heard the same old song over and over. Gear doesn't matter, they say, and then they spend all their time talking about gear anyway. Well, on this channel, I'm not gonna pretend as if gear doesn't matter. It does. Especially lenses make a huge difference to how your pictures turn out, and with the right choice of lens, you can make your pictures look dreamy or documentary sharp, and this choice is really very important. And the handling also makes a difference. If the lens that you want to shoot only has manual focus, then you're gonna struggle if you can only shoot with one hand, for example. Lately I've been having this problem a lot, and so I've been exploring all sorts of autofocus options that I have lying around here. I've been testing out different Canon lenses. For example, there was a video on the 35mm f2, and I also tried out a 50mm f1.8. I also tried a 55 to 250mm telephoto zoom lens several times actually, and even a humble kit lens for a crop sensor camera that I really shouldn't have put on a full-frame camera. In this case, my Lumix S5 IIx. I was not very impressed with the results from the kit lens, although the pictures are nice. I think the image quality was suffering quite a bit from that lens. And I noticed that I had a bit of a gap in my autofocus lens collection on the wider end of things. So while I was researching these videos about Canon lenses, I actually stumbled on a lens that looked very interesting to me, which was the 17 to 40mm f4L lens. And this is the professional line of Canon lenses. I never owned one of these lenses before because they were always very expensive when I was still buying Canon lenses. But ever since Canon introduced the RF mount, these EF lenses have actually become quite affordable. So when I saw how relatively cheap this lens was, I just had to pick it up and try it out to see whether this wide angle range is actually something that is missing from my work properly, or whether I'm not even going to use it all that much. So today I'm taking you along on my first photo walk with this lens, and we'll see what we can find in the ultra wide angle range. So let's get into it. I was on the hunt for graffiti and urban landscapes that day, so my first stop was the wall that surrounds part of an area that used to belong to a factory here that makes train carriages. There's loads of graffiti on that wall, and although a wall isn't particularly interesting to shoot, there are all these little details to focus on too. The crazy thing is that this lens is even wider than my GoPro. Normally, when I make these videos, my photos are a tighter view than what my GoPro produces in linear mode, but not in this case. There were a few shots right away that show off how wide this lens really is. Of course, I also tried out some video with this lens, and I think it works really well with the stabilization on the Lumix. Wide lenses tend to be really easy to stabilize anyway, but I had some issues with my Canon 18 to 55mm kit lens before, and I wanted to test it out properly with this lens. I think it actually looks really quite lovely for video. Who can resist a red fire hydrant? Not me, especially when I'm shooting color, which isn't very often. Of course, with the graffiti it made sense to shoot color, although that can also look great in black and white. There's only so much you can do with a wall though, so it was definitely time to move on. Then I turned into this side street because I couldn't resist the composition that I've tried a few times already, but that I thought could use a bit more of a dynamic wider angle. I got lucky because just in that moment someone came out of the house. Only problem is that this lens is absolutely massive, so I startled the guy a little, which is quite clearly visible in the picture. He didn't react negatively though, so it was all good. But this definitely isn't a stealthy street photography lens. Sometimes it's alright to be noticed though when you're shooting street, so I don't really mind that it's so massive. I really like the texture of flaking graffiti, and of course it is fitting that I could now get really close to a graffiti that says close. I think this picture is a great example of how a wide-angle lens can be helpful sometimes. I never managed to take a picture of this scene before that I liked, because it was virtually impossible to line everything up so that it wouldn't look messy while still keeping the context of the background. With the wide-angle view, I could hide most of the messy cars, and after a bit of back and forth, I also minimized the intersections with all the windows of the buildings in the background. There's still one spot that breaks my brain a little, which is this one here, but arranging it so that the edges line up properly was the least messy way to solve this impossible Tetris. And I even managed to get one car in the frame almost completely, which feels really pleasing to me. All the color matching is really fun too. The red car on the right, the red houses, red graffiti, the complementary green. It all works really well, and there's even one blue car that matches the graffiti on the left. And I never would have managed to get this shot with any other lens I have, so I'm really happy with this. Also, this is definitely a shot that needs an EVF. Even if I had a proper wide-angle lens from my Leica M6, with the viewfinder parallax it would be almost impossible to line it up this well. I can get this through. The entire area that you see here is actually one big construction site now. It's only a few months later, but they're now building an entirely new neighborhood there, which makes me rather happy that I documented what was there before, just before it disappeared. So interesting in that respect. All this green is now gone, and instead there are just big construction machines tearing up everything. So if you put off taking pictures in a specific place because there's always tomorrow, then maybe go sooner rather than later, because the spot that you want to photograph might just disappear from one day to the next. And of course I took the opportunity to make a new friend. Hello. I have a gazillion pictures of dogs, But I never had such an odd angle before because of the ultra wide I was shooting. I also find it really funny that the tip of my braid made it into the picture too, and that just shows you how wide this lens really is. I think I found the perfect subject matter for testing this lens, right? Bit of graffiti always works well for wide lenses. Interesting, no? I'm just trying this out before I take it to a place where I was a while back and where there's a lot more graffiti and where a wide lens would come in really handy. But that involves taking the train, and I wanted to try this out first before I take it there. But it seems to be working all right, and I'm quite happy with what I'm getting so far. The dog was definitely a highlight. I did not expect it to work so well with the super wide angle and then the dog coming closer. That was great. There is a place near here that I've been meaning to photograph for a while, which is sort of architectural, and I needed a wider lens for that. I tried before with a 35mm, I think. Did I? I think I did. And it didn't quite work so well because I was not getting the right views. But I think with this lens, I might get some cool views. I will try it and see. It's not so far from here, so I'll head there now and try around some more with this lens. And yeah, I'm having fun with it. It's such an unusual focal length for me. Normally I gravitate towards 35mm. I even spent a year once only shooting a 35mm lens, so I'm really honed in on that kind of focal length. And I noticed that when I zoomed in, I always ended up at sort of 35. So very unsurprising, I suppose. I still need to get used to all this super wide views. But yeah, I'm having fun. It's super interesting. All right, speak to you later. I also shot some close-ups too to figure out whether this lens has some bokeh to offer, and I would say it's rather alright at f4. Nothing spectacular, of course, but it definitely can work quite well at 40mm, so I'm actually quite happy with this. I'm cold. I headed into another neighborhood next, and on the way I noticed that the playground was empty. Usually when I walk past here, there are a load of children playing, and it's not the kind of place you can just walk through without aim, so I had never actually taken pictures there before. It has all these interesting shapes and colors though, so I thought it would make a really nice photographic playground too. And as always, I stopped for some mirror self-portraits too. I've taken a ton of these over the years, and I always add some to my collection whenever I get the opportunity. I tried a couple of compositions here to see whether I liked the ultra-wide view for this, but I have to say that for such scenes I much prefer a 35mm angle. I didn't stop to perfect the composition though, because I was headed somewhere else. And then I finally reached my destination. A strange, semi-brutalist square that seems really odd architecturally, and it's also half run down. I just can't really understand what they were thinking when they were building this. It's just such an odd mix with the columns and the concrete elements. But it's definitely a fun place to try out an ultra-wide lens, also because there's a little bit of graffiti and murals and that sort of thing. These murals are actually outside a place where they offer Mandarin language classes, so that explains the panda. And I think it really helps make this place look a little less depressing. I think without this mural, this place would be a bit bleak, maybe. Bit of a vlogging test with this. I think I got the pictures that I wanted to get. Ooh, this is quite heavy. I don't think I can vlog like this. Oh god, I think I need to get a tripod. Who needs a tripod if there is a ledge? This is really interesting for me because I never had such an ultra-wide lens. Most people, this is completely normal, but I totally never had one of these before. Only 80mm to 55mm, and that one actually was on a crop sensor, so it was never this wide. So this is quite interesting for me, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. But it's a little bit too loud here to record, so I think I'm going to leave it at that with my first impressions. I had a lot of fun with this, and I will be enjoying getting more footage with this lens and also photos. And yeah, I'm enjoying myself. So talk to you later when I'm in the studio. Although I think I might get some more video perhaps, and maybe I see some more pictures. We'll see. When a place is run down like this, of course, it attracts taggers too, which only makes it look more run down in the end. I guess when it was new, it looked decent enough for about 5 minutes, but yeah, definitely not the prettiest place in the world. Obviously good for me though, because it makes for more interesting pictures. So after this photo walk and a few more since then, I actually think that this lens is a great addition to my gear collection. I definitely made the right choice, and what I do with these kinds of lenses doesn't really warrant one of the more expensive L lenses. For example, the Canon 17 to 35mm f2.8 would be a little bit overkill for me. It is heavier, and it's also about double the price if you want to get a good one. This one is already very heavy anyway. It weighs about half a kilo, and the Lumix isn't the lightest camera on Earth either. I think it's about 700 grams, so in total it's more than a kilo. So lifting that with one hand for vlogging, yeah, no, I'm not a bodybuilder. So this lens isn't really a lens that I would take just in case, although I have put it into my backpack sometimes in case there was something worth photographing in a wider view. On these occasions, I got really nice footage, and I'm glad that I took it, but it is a commitment to take it because it is quite heavy. And if you're not going to use it, then you might as well not take such a heavy lens. So if you're looking for a vlogging lens, especially for the Lumix cameras, then I would probably think of a different lens. The 18 to 40mm Lumix native lens is actually a good choice for that one. And at f4.5 at the widest, the Lumix lens isn't that much narrower, at least at 18mm. This Canon lens actually has the advantage that it is constant aperture throughout the focal ranges. So even at 40mm, it remains at f4. And most kit lenses and kit zoom lenses don't really have that sort of possibility. The Lumix lens goes quite tight. It's f6.3 at the longest range, and that's already, it's not going to give you any creamy bokeh or something like that. Whereas with this lens, you can still get some bokeh on some subject separation. With f4 at 40mm, it's actually not all that bad. But of course, there is a trade-off always. The Lumix lens is only 155 grams versus 470 grams, so that's a substantial weight difference. This lens actually works really well on the Viltrox adapter. I didn't notice any problems with it. The autofocus worked fine, and you can hear the autofocus motors a little bit, but not an awful lot. I thought that it was really very well controlled, especially if you're recording with an external mic, which I do anyway. It really doesn't matter so much. So this is really a great option for me if I want to shoot something like wide angle urban landscapes, or if I'm shooting an event perhaps, because this lens definitely looks very professional, and if you want to seem legit and like you have a purpose being someplace, then this lens is the one to take, not one of these dinky little lenses that make you look like an amateur. What makes this lens really useful for me is that it isn't actually quite that characterful in comparison to other lenses that I shoot. I shoot a lot of vintage lenses, and they have so much character that the footage can kind of stand out sometimes. If I combine very swirly footage from, for example, my Canon 50mm LTM lens, it actually looks so jarring when I put it next to GoPro footage that it sort of seems out of place. And with this lens, the 17 to 40, I don't really have that problem. It actually fits very well with GoPro footage, and it's kind of very seamless in that way. Very interesting combination in that respect, although I'm not sure that this is really a positive for some of you. More characterful lenses might be more interesting for you. This is not the kind of lens to choose if you want character, soul, that sort of thing. It's just very matter of fact, I believe. But this is really the better lens to choose if I want to accumulate footage for the videos that I'm making, and it seems less jarring, and I think it's a very good combination also because it's so wide and goes so well with GoPro footage. So I thought it was a good combination for this kind of purpose. So it's more meant to be a video lens for me. But occasionally I will also take it out for photography purposes because I don't really have any other lenses that are this wide. I have some 24mm lenses, two in fact, one vintage and one modern. But I don't really have anything wider than that. and this fills in this gap really nicely. For this ultra-wide purpose, I'm actually very happy with the results that I'm getting. I got some really cool pictures from another place that I will show you in another video soonish, I believe. And I think that this is really a great lens for that purpose, for architecture and for urban landscapes, and for sometimes the kind of things that I like to shoot, places with graffiti and that sort of thing. So if you haven't checked out any of the old EF glass from Canon, the L lenses in particular, the professional line, then I would definitely recommend checking them out, because they are a lot cheaper now. And ever since Canon released the RF mount instead of the EF mount, these lenses can be had quite cheaply actually. And this one surprised me in the price. And there are other options that are just as good as lenses and that are surprisingly cheap now for professional glass. Many of these lenses are iconic and render really nicely, and they're well worth checking out, not just in this wide angle zoom range, but also the 50mm primes are very nice. And there are many options that are well worth checking out if you haven't done so already, and you're looking for something that is, you know, matter of fact, professional, rendering very clinically in many cases, but still good quality and professional. The size and the weight is the only trade-off for these lenses. They are now much more modern, smaller lenses that you can buy instead, like small little 40mm and that sort of thing. All these professional lenses are quite big and heavy and look the part of being professional, but they're also built like tanks, weather sealed and all of that, so they're really very good options for that sort of purpose. And with the Viltrox adapter, they're also a very good option for Lumix shooters. I found it very reliable in this case. And in general, with this Viltrox adapter, I only had issues with one lens, and it's not really a lens that anyone would use on a full-frame camera anyway. It was the standard kit lens that was giving me trouble. Every other lens was sort of working okay, even if the autofocus motors were very slow. And shooting these kinds of Canon lenses on a Lumix is actually a very good option, especially if you don't shoot with autofocus lenses often. And in my case, normally I shoot manual focus lenses. So for me, it doesn't really make sense to spend a lot of money on very expensive autofocus lenses when I have much better manual lenses that I prefer to shoot most of the time. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel, so I would really appreciate it. And in this case, I suggest that you subscribe to my photography channel, because this is where these videos live, and I only share them with the main channel so that they get the widest possible reach. A big shout out also to my Ko-fi supporters. You make all this possible, and I'm very grateful for it. If you also want to support what I do, you can head over to Ko-fi, or maybe just watch another video. There's actually an entire photography playlist that you can watch here. And I hope I see you soon for another video. Bye.